Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1285. And we finished the second middle paragraph on page Aleph Resh Behei, 1285. I should say 1285. And the discussion here is about the two dimensions in the divine, one called Gilui and one called Helam. And when I mean Helam be'etzem, things that are completely out of the realm of consciousness or revelation, they're fundamentally concealed. And then there's a level of Gilui, even if it's a Gilui to yourself, but it's already entered the stratosphere, it's entered the world of revelation. And therefore, as he said, the words that he said, Gam agam shagili rak la'atzme yovel lidei gili lizulose gamke. It will also come to be revealed to another, because since it's gili be'etzem, yesh le'shayches ala gili azulis. Since it's fundamentally in a state of revelation, even though right now it's revealed to yourself, it means it's shaykh. There's a shayches. However, at this point, it's still in a state of concealment. It's like the example he gives in Basiligani in chapter 16. For this teacher who's not revealing everything that he knows in his teaching to the student, but it's embedded in there, even though right now only the teacher knows it. Then there's the level of Helam. And that in that case, it's only Gili Me'Helam. It's not a Davar Chadash. It's not a reveal. It's not a new thing. You're revealing that which is concealed. And the same is true, Lifnat Tzimtzum and Etzem HaOyer, meaning Etzem HaGilui, that precedes Alei Saratzin, even before the desire, which means the Oyer that relates to and is envisioning existence, which is the 10 spheres. So higher than that is the Etzem HaOyer. There's spheres, but the spheres are Ein Ketz. There's no limit to them. So there too, as he says, that means that has some connection. That's why there's spheres there. But the higher level, who? What we just described as Shmoi, Havaya. But the level of who? So based on this level on its own, it's shaykh, like he says, it's possible they'll never enter the world of revelation, not to yourself and not to others. So the Mela, you can't say, here you can't say that lower level of revelation is encompassed there. So therefore it's so it's higher than the relationship with Araveda below, because that's already a state where it comes and expressed to another and to existence. And there, if there's Amshachim from there, it's going to be an Chodosh, because it's not waiting to be revealed. It's not in that realm. It's going to be complete. It's going to be a new energy, which we shall talk about more what that means. We also discussed it earlier, but it's going to be a true Chodosh in that sense. So essentially, summing up the last two paragraphs is that all of Seder Shtalshlus, even the highest levels, in some way there's some relationship between a lower level and a higher level, but it's concealed and it's encompassed. And therefore, it needs to be revealed. But there's a relationship, even to the levels when he spoke about Keser and Ratzon and Tainug, like he said, all the way to the highest levels on top of page 1285 and 1284. Whereas in this level of Helam Etzem, you can't use the word iskalulus or Helam, that the Gilui is concealed and not yet revealed. It's a paradigm shift. It's a different qualitative state altogether. And I elaborated more and explained it to previous classes. If anybody has a question, please, now is a good time. So now he's going to bring this back. You go just to keep the flow going. If you go back to page 1282, where all this began, the discussion, this is all coming to explain the difference between mitzvos, Torah mitzvos, and neshamas. Because the question that he asked was, why can't mitzvahs alone draw down this highest levels of the etzem? Why do you need Mesiras Nefesh and Ava B'chol Meidecha and Ava Rabba? As he asked the question on 1281 and 82. So he introduced that we need to have, because we need to come and dig deeper and find deeper revelations. Mitzvahs alone can draw the Eir into the Keli, but not the Etzem, the Sheirish of Keli itself. That you need a deeper Avodah and the Neshamas, which are higher than Torah mitzvahs. So he explained that that there's the two levels, Hu is Shmai, or Hu and Havaya, and that's what we're discussing now. So now he's going to bring it back to what he began on page 1282. We started talking about mitzvahs. If you remember, the line was, I'm reading from 1282, middle of the page, second paragraph. So he says, so though mitzvahs, like he says there, are a draw down divine energy, but if you want to have from Atzmus Ein Sof a completely new energy, you need neshamas and the avodah of etzem neshmasa, and that's where he began by inyan who. That's the inyan, the hinan is bar le'il, the mitzvahs, Ayin Beis is the Havaya. And that's how we got into it. He says that mitzvahs is the letters Havaya, Mem Tzadik Vav Hey, the Mem Tzadik replaces the Yud K Vav K of the Vav K, Yud K of Yud K Vav K. Torah is the Oyer of Havaya, mitzvahs is the Kelim of Havaya. And then he goes on to the whole discussion of who was Shmoi Bilvad, or Atu V'Shmoi, or Atu Havaya rather. So there's the who and the Havaya, and that's the whole discussion we just concluded. So now he's going to come back to what he said on page 1282, that a mitzvah relates to Havaya. So let's understand now, we'll understand what a mitzvah really accomplishes. And from that, we'll go to understanding what neshamas add to the picture. Essentially, we're going to be moving from Shmoi to who? From the Gilui, even the Gilui La'atzmei, but like Yud K and Vav K, one is a Gilui La'atzmei, Gilui to the other. But so right now, this paragraph now is going to be talking about mitzvahs. Bringing it back to conclude the point that he began on 1282. So what does he say? The new paragraph, the third paragraph on 1285, which can be the pages, the PDFs can be found at ayinbeis.com. So it says, and so too will be understood the inyan ha-mitzvahs. Shehein b'bchinas ha'esi is the Havaya sheba'atzmos. So just as we understand now what Havaya is about, this level of Gili within Atzmuse, which means before the Tzimtzum. So since the mitzvahs are the letters of Havaya Sheba Atzmus, it's interesting he's saying now Sheba Atzmus, because you could also have Havaya on lower levels of Ishtalshus. You know, Yud Kei Vav Kei, as we learned, is on all levels. It's also Chachma, Bina, Zah, and Malchus. And it's also Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah. But the root of Havaya, in its first root, is before the Tzimtzum, what he's calling Havaya Sheba Atzmus. Because remember, the Gili is also a Gili Ba'atzmuse, within himself. It's just in Atzmus meaning, we're not talking here Atzmus as an Ata. We're talking about Atzmus meaning the core that's higher than the Tzimtzum. Then Atzmus itself, there's a level of Hu and a level of Shmai. So he's talking about Havaya Sheba, that's the mitzvahs are the letters of Havaya. And their highest root, it's Havaya Sheba Atzmus. The Ikram Hu Be'esius Yutke. And the primary element of it is the first two letters because that's the highest revelation. The revelation to self, Yutke. The Hainu B'chinas Ratzon Atzmi Shalamayla Maharatzon Sheba Elamus. The Ratzon Atzmi, the core desire, that's higher than the Ratzon for the world. We talked about this, but I'll explain in a moment. Let me just finish the sentence. The Ratzon for the elements, meaning before the Tzimtzum itself, where God is it's arisen in his desire to build a world in which we would do mitzvahs. Remember, we said the mitzvahs is the purpose. The world is the means where the Eibishter wants us to do mitzvahs. So there's the Ratzon, which is more on the outer dimension, focusing on building the structure, on creating the art. And then there's the Ratzon Atzmi of mitzvahs. And mitzvahs also relate to that. We learned earlier that the Vavke of mitzvahs is how mitzvahs come down in this physical world. But the Yudke mitzvah is its inner, deepest purpose, is the very purpose of existence. Why he's building this home? The Ratzon Primi, the Ratzon Atzmi, as he calls it here. So the Ratzon Shabbat is the Vavke, the Ein Sof, what he called his Pashtus Sa'er, where God is already envisioning and desiring an existence. So what you're beginning to emerge is the 10 hidden spheres. But the Ratzon Atzmi is on the level of the the infinite spheres. Because there he's just decided, it's not yet been defined. Even within the teacher, he's already thinking about with the other, that's the Vavke, that's the Ratzon Le'elamus. The Ratzon Atzmi is the mitzvahs themselves. So here again, Etzem Ha'er does not mean who. It means the Etzem Ha'er, as in contrast to the extension of the air as it relates to existence, the air as it is to himself, which is the purpose of it all, which is the mitzvahs, reflect what God wants. Even though he wants the world, but he doesn't want it as an end in itself. And the mitzvahs are actually God's Ratzon Atzmi. But nevertheless, it's still Gili. Even the higher level, even Yudke, is still an element of Gili. It's to himself, it's true. And he's not yet thinking about or expressing his desire for existence, but there is an element of Gili here in the mitzvahs, even the higher level. And that's why there is Shaykh, has a relationship with Halas Man, the Aveda of mitzvahs below. The Aveda, the mitzvahs, Halas Man, the mitzvahs. So though at this point it's still all within God's deeper consciousness, but that's what he wants. He wants mitzvahs. So therefore, later, when they'll come out begili and there'll be a creation of existence. So the work that will be done in this world of mitzvahs touches that highest level of Yudke, because that's where it originated from. And as we said, the whole purpose of that Gilui is for the purpose of existence, even though right now he's not thinking about existence, because that's not the focus. The focus is on his Ratzon Atzmi. But it's already in the world and domain, the realm of Gilui, like we learned. And therefore, atzmus ha'er. And therefore, the Hamshach, now he means atzmus ha'er, he means that which is higher than Gili. So Hamshach is not atzmus ha'er, it's the Gili ha'er. However, in Gili itself, there's the levels we just described, the two main levels. V'hainu, the gam b'chinas ha'gili de ein sof, ein ze Hamshach is atzmus ha'er kim b'chinas chitzenis. So even though, yes, even in that world where there's the Gili of Eir and Sof, we're talking about revealing the infinite divine light before the Tzimtzum, but it's not the Hamshach of Atzmus Ha'er Mamish, only the Chetzenius. That's what's coming down. Now you can interpret this parenthesis in two ways. You could say he's talking about now versus La'asid Love, because now it's mitzvahs, Mem Tzadik. So the Yud K is not really revealed. And that's what he means. Or you could say, even when the Yud K will be revealed, it's still not Helem Atzmi. So therefore, he's calling it Chitzenius. So even though he just said Chitzenius is the Ratzon for Elamus, whereas the Ratzon for Atzmus, he doesn't call Chitzenius. His Pashtus Sa'er, actually, he uses the word. But it's all relative. But relative to the fundamental state of concealment that's beyond altogether any Gilui, this would be called Chitzenius. These are the two ways I would explain this parenthesis. I just want to reiterate and re-emphasize a certain key point here. Because you ask yourself the question, 1 second here. Ratzon Atzmi for mitzvahs. So even though it's a Gilui, but you're talking about an Atzmi, it's an Atzmi that's the Gilui. So why is that ultimately not Atzmus Ha'er? So going back to the Basa Legani, which can help understand this, and I already explained it, but I want to say it again. We are accustomed to understanding that and appreciating that the more something is begili, the greater it is. Because we live in a world of giluyim, as I explained yesterday. Everything by us is either I see it or I don't see it. It takes work to come to realize that the greatest things in life are invisible. And even then, it's not easy for us because we relate so much to the sensory stimulation that anything that's not begili leaves a certain mystery, so to speak. But when you think about it, where do you experience more reality? In the world of Gilui or in the world of Helam and Helam Be'etzem? And I'll give an example, a human example, then another example that he used here earlier, and then we'll relate it to above. I use this very often. I think it captures it very well. When you're asked to speak about, let's say, something superficial, the weather, sports, something that there's no real significance. Look how much we could talk about it and talk radio, and people don't stop talking about it. Someone asks you to share something intimate, something that really negay benefesh, you'll find that all people, have less words. The deeper you go, like liba lepum legalia is an expression in Chazal, that a person, that which is in your heart, cannot be expressed through your lips, through words. Like sometimes they say, I don't really have the words to express my feelings. I can't really describe fully what I just experienced. What are you saying? You're saying that words are not adequate. There's something deeper than words. When something is superficial, we can express. The question is why? It would seem to be the opposite. That the deeper it is, the closer, more real it is, the more you should be able to talk about it. Because words are giluyim, are containers. They're kelim to eir. Now, every keli has its parameters. You could only pour that much water in a cup, a quart, a gallon, whatever it may be. But not more than that. Since words are containers, so they only can contain that much intensity. So when it comes to superficial things, no problem. You can talk and talk because the oir is not so great. But as soon as the oir hanefesh, in other words, the deeper forces, the deeper intimate and more intense experiences in your life need to be expressed, the kelim are just not adequate. That's why we find the language of metaphor, poetry, song, music. Kulmus halev. It's called the quill of the heart or the soul. It's more than what words can express because it's a different language. It's a language that the containers are wider, so it can express deeper energy. And then sometimes that's also not adequate. Sometimes just a cry, oy vey, in the negative, or in the positive, a laugh, a chuckle. That can express sometimes more than an entire book. Because the more the oil is stronger, the keli has to be a different type of keli. Basically, the bigger the kelim, or not, the less the energy, the more kelim you have. So as you go deeper into the soul, there comes a point that the Zohar explains with Kir Shefer, the different sounds when we sound the Shefer all express these different levels, that there's a point where there's a kol de lo yishtama, a voice that can't even be heard. It's so intense that even a pips, even a cry is too much. That's why you see, tragically, people in deep trauma, shock. They can't even cry. They can't even say anything, complete silence. That silence in many ways carries more power than all the words in the world. So you see the paradox here. The deeper you go into the etzem hanefesh, the less expression there is. So if someone were to say to you, can you tell me, can you some way express to me, in any way, the deepest, innermost experiences of your life? And I'm not talking about tell me the story. I'm talking about how you experience it. The truth is, as soon as you start speaking, it's already not it. Which is what I said yesterday, why the Eibishter says to Moshe, no one can see me and live. That wasn't like just a game, because seeing me is an etzem, and seeing etzem are contradiction. As soon as you see it, it's not it. It's already an expression of it. So the truth is, as difficult it is for us to really wrap our heads around it, that the deepest things are not expressible. That's why I often give the example, what's your left leg doing right now? As soon as you're conscious, you already brought it into a level of world of Gili. So if you really want to know what's going on by the Eibishter, obviously, because we live in a world of structure and Giluim, the Eibishter has to reveal himself to us. Ata haresu ladas, v'yadaita ayem, v'shavesa levavecha, matan Torah. Life itself, we have Giluyim because that's the only way we can hold on to it. But if you were to say to the Eibishter, I really want to know what's going on inside of you, in the deepest part of your etzem, the answer would be, if you go there, it won't be begili. Because they like Ili Yadaiti Vayisiv. If you knew me, you'd be me. It's an experience. It's not words. It's not even thoughts. It's not even Gili. There's no Gili involved. So we talked earlier, the other example, the king, when he's in his inner sanctum, completely alone. The Rebbe in the privacy of the Holy of Holies. Kodesh Kadoshim, Gan Eden Elyon. We're not talking about as he's coming out to speak to his people, to teach, to farbring. In his inner sanctum, his innermost level, that's an area that's considered like Shashuim Lefonov, Shashua Melech Batzmusei. It's completely within himself, and it may not even be revealed. Even what he's doing that he's aware of is already a form of Gili. But then there are things that are just, the etzem is just being an etzem. It doesn't have to express itself. It doesn't need consciousness. It is what it is. And as soon as you express it, you're already moved into a different paradigm, a different reality. So that carries a far deeper level of etzem than that which is expressed. So mitzvahs, even the Ratzon Atzmi part, not the mitzvah as it manifests in Gashmis in Vavke, but even as it is in Yudke, it still manifests in Yudke. It's the Ratzon Hashem that the Eibishter wants us to do mitzvahs. Which mitzvahs? The mitzvahs that he then will tell us. So it's true. There's the level of the mitzvah as we relate to it and it's revealed to another, but there's the Ratzon Atzmi within it, but the Eibishter knows exactly what he wants, but it's already in a conscious state. Yes, revealed to himself. But then there is the Helam Atzmi, where all this doesn't have any revelation. It's going into what is going on in the Eibishter's deepest, most place. It's exactly like I said before, silence. There's no expression, even within himself. It's not necessarily a quality that he's aware. Remember, awareness and consciousness is already a level. It's not a necessity from an Atzmi. An Atzmi doesn't need to be aware. Awareness is already a somewhat of a descent or somewhat of a manifestation. It's part of the purpose of Dir B'Tachtenim. If you want Tachtenim, you're going to need awareness and you're going to need Gilui. Because just like you need, even if you want Helam, you need Gilui. You need Gilui to conceal that Gilui. But Etzem is beyond Helam and Gilui. Now, we're not talking about Etzem, Ato, we're talking even Hu is also a state of fundamental concealment, which is not even part of the process. Now, you could ask, is there any connection between the Ratzon Atzmi of Yudke with this Helam Atzmi? That's a very good question. There has to be a connection, but it's not a connection that you can trace, because like he said, it's not his scholarless. You can't say, like the Koyach HaMaskil and Seichel, yes, they're very different. The Koyach HaMaskil is not intelligent, but it's the power of intelligence. You can't say the Helam Atzmi is the power of that will become revealed in the Gili, the Atzmi. It remains fundamentally something that belongs in the innermost chambers of the divine that are higher than Gili. And it's hard to understand unless you really relate to something that's an Atzmi. That's why I gave the example of ourselves. You have to go to a place that's completely not expressible, that is just, you are who you are, and that's it. Can you talk about it? Yes, I'm talking about it right now. But as soon as I talk about it, the talking itself is I'm trying to explain something that's not expressible. Now, we relate to it in some way. It resonates, everybody on their own level. Just trying to find some words for something that really has no words, to be honest. So that's what he says here. This is all Abshach Ein Ze B'chinas Atzmus Ha'er. Now, before I continue, any questions? Because he's going to explain this now further by Inyan Hu.
I have a question. I had understood that because mitzvah is in the realm of gilui, even the yud-ke, even though it's a concealed, it's a gilui la'atzmo, I think you said, or something to that effect. But essentially, it's still in the realm of gilui. The mitzvahs were not sufficient, if you will, containers to bring in or chadash because they're in the realm of gilui davka, but rather it takes a neshama, it takes mesiras nefesh and avarabba b'chol me'odecha to get to release an or chadash. But as you just pointed when you began the class to 1282, where he says to bring or chadash you have to get into the oasis of Havaya. So I'm a little confused about
where does he say that? No. Or chadash, you have to go higher than oasis Havaya. Where do you see oasis Havaya is or chadash? That's not correct.
Where you opened up the class, you pointed back.
So it's a misunderstanding. I read explicitly. He says that the Ur Chodesh has to be dafkai de'avedus and neshamas u'be'etzim nishmasam, not through mitzvahs and yud-ke vav-ke.
Okay, so what? Okay, so the way I said it was okay until the last issue.
Well, your question is based on. That's what I'm saying. Ur Chodesh is not Havaya; it's higher than Havaya.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. That's exactly what he said. Okay.
I am also trying.
Now, remember, we haven't yet finished the subject. I gave I gave a preview of what he's going to say. We're going to learn this inside the actual addition of neshamas over mitzvahs. But he's going to continue first to explain mitzvahs more before he goes back. And next page on 1286, he's going to come. We're going to go discuss the neshamas. Go ahead.
I'm also trying to understand. We learned just now that the helem ha'atzmi that is not the gilui gam le'atzmoi, completely a different thing, the who. But actually, this is the first step, like a memutza, to what's going to happen after that. Even though that it's a different.
So first of all, he didn't say memutza. You asked me this yesterday. You want to use the word memutza? I'm not against it, but he didn't say that expression memutza, and it's true. It is a step. That's not ata, and it's not shmoi. So you want to understand what the role of this step is. We're going to learn this. He's going to explain what the role of it is soon. So what are you asking? Whether who is a form of gilui because of that?
No, if the who, if it's a form of gilui that you need it in order to come to the next level.
I explained before that it's not necessarily in that way. I wouldn't call it. It's not a gilui period, that's for sure. He said clearly there's no gilui at all there. The question is, yes, of course, in a way, without who you don't get the shmoi, but because you have to have a helem in order to have a gilui, so to speak. But it's not a helem hashayach ala gilui. That's the point. In other words, it's not a gilui helem on the lower levels. So the gilui of shmoi is not a gilui of who. Who always remains fundamentally behelem be'etzem. So is it a step? It's a step, correct. It's lower than atzmus, but higher than shmoi. Exact understanding of it, I would wait till we finish the subject. He's going to explain it more.
Thank you.
But I explained so far that it gives us in the world of Metzias Nimtza. If you want the real atheist, it would be like this. Atzmus Ato is built in Metzias Nimtza. Who is already Metzias Nimtza, but a Helem Be'etzem, and Shmoi or Havaya is Metzias Nimtza, but in a state of Gili. That's how I would put it, if you want to have real distinction. So who is already Metzias Nimtza, which is already something. It's already a Metzias that's in our realm, but not in a Metzias Gili. And Shmoi will be a Gili. So who plays a critical role, because in the world of Metzias Nimtza, it gives us the experience of something that's completely atzmizdik. Okay? Like we said, the mystique, the completely beyond. I hope that was helpful. So he says like this, he continues, the Inyan in this is the Hinyan is barely ill, because it was explained earlier, Sha mitzvahs hein b'chinas ha'esius, the kalim the shem Havaya, that the mitzvahs are the letters. Remember, the mitzvahs are tluyas in Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the containers of the Shem Havaya. The Torah hi b'chinas ha'er. And Torah is the Ur of Havaya. He said this explicitly in the parentheses. I'm close to the bottom of page 1282. The Torah b'chinas ha'er, the Shem Havaya, Mitzvos b'chinas ha'kelim. There was a yesh leimer. Okay. V'hine yedua, and now it's known. The Torah mitzvahs, k'moshem b'chinas ha'keser, that Torah mitzvahs, as they are on the level of keser, the crown, so they manifest in two different dimensions. There's going to be the chitzenius ha'keser and primius ha'keser, sometimes known as arich and atik. So he says like this: hamitzvahs hem b'gulgalta. They're the skull. They're the level of the skull. So when you look at the human body, let's just go back to that because it's all a mushal, tselem elikim. So you have the 10 spheres, which is chachma bina das all the way to malchus. Chabad is within the moich, that's intelligence. Chachma bina das. Chagas are emotions. Uzah and malchus. What's higher than Chabad? The crown. So the crown is sometimes compared to the skull, which is like a crown that encases the brain and the mind. So it's makif. It's not like a crown that you put on a king's head, but relative to the very intelligence that's begoli in the brain and the mind, the Golgalta is called chitzenius hakeser because it's the first level that's makif, that surrounds and encases the skull in the brain. That's Golgalta. Mitzvos, the Kabbalah, Chassidus, and Kabbalah explain, comes from that level. It's Ratzon Elyon. The Golgalta doesn't have any gilui in it. It's just like a Ratzon. That's what God wants. It doesn't have an element of pleasure or element of intelligence in it. It's like bone. It doesn't even have nerves in it, really. So the Golgalta is compared to the Ratzon of mitzvahs. V'teira hu b'chachmas timah. Chachmas timah is not Golgalta. The skull has no chachma in it. Even though, I don't want to go into it here, but in Kabbalah, Chassidus explains in volume 1, we learned it, that in Golgalta there's a me'ain, there's a little level that has a little chachma in it. But chachmas timah is called chachma. However, it's super consciousness. But it's not the skull. So it's the super conscious that's higher than the conscious chachma gluya, and that's the level of Torah. Because Torah is chachma, Torah is wisdom. It's God's wisdom. However, it's higher than our wisdom, that's why it's called chachma stima. Bechinas primis hakeser. U'kamay shekasa b'lekuta Torah, Ba'abir da'ani Hashem Elokeichem. I believe that's in Shlach. Like it says in Lekutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe, in the explanation of the Maimer Ani Hashem Elokeichem. So the root of Torah mitzvahs in Keser is the difference between the skull, Galgalta, and which is Chitzenius, and Pnimius HaKeser, which is Chochmas Timah. Now, Chochmas Timah they can both be an Arich. This could both be Chitzenius Arich, Pnimius Arich, or sometimes Chochmas Timah is associated with Atik. So it could be Chitzenius Keser would be Arich, Pnimius Keser would be Atik. But you could interpret them both ways. So like he says in Tanya, for example, chapter 5, what does he say? That Torah is called Mozin, Lechem. And mitzvahs is Levush. Because a mitzvah you don't ingest. A mitzvah is a makif. Torah becomes part of your mind. It's internalized, which is like Chachma. Chachma is a primi. In truth, Chachma Stemah is higher than our primi, but it's still Chachma. Like we said earlier with a tam, that there's a tam for the rotzen, except we don't know the reason. It's God's reason. Golgalta is just do the rotzen. It's Kabbalah sel. Hashem says, do this mitzvah. There's timei mitzvahs. The reasons for the mitzvahs is already Torah. But the actual doing of a mitzvah is far more an action of a Kabbalah sel action of rotzen Hashem. Torah is more like Chochmasi is Baruch. So in that sense, that's the difference. He says, Umeshum zeh, and due to this, That's why when it evolves further, that when this comes into the levels of ishtalshalis, what are mitzvahs? Mitzvahs are called evarim de malka. They're called the limbs, the parts of the king, the limbs of the king. What he calls here evarim chitzenim. So just like physically, a human being's arms and legs and all the limbs and organs of the person or limbs of the person are an extension, but they're outer evarim. They're not the inner ones. They're the outer ones. And mitzvahs are compared to that. Beruchnius, it's like evarim de malka. Every mitzvah corresponds to another level of God's, so to speak, skeleton, if you wish. Not skeleton is not the right word. Of God's structure, the divine structure. Like we said, mitzvahs are thluyas by kelim, the kelim and asis of Havaya. So so-called the body, the kelim of Elikus. That's mitzvahs. But Torah, he b'chinas evarim pnimim. Torah is like the internal organs, like the mind, like the heart. Here the focus is on the mind. So the brain, the physical container of the brain, of the mind, which could be the brain, or in this case, the skull, that's mitzvahs. Mitzvahs is like the outer skeleton or the outer limbs of the divine structure, the Adam Elyon, if you wish, which the Tzelem Elokim in which we were created. And Torah is the evarim pnimim. Now I bring another Likutei Torah. This is in, I believe, in Ve'es Chanon. Yeah. In the explanation and the Maimer Vaydaber Elikim is called Advarim Eila of the Aseres Adibris. Why does he call it that? Because there's a lot of Vaydaber Elikims. So he's talking about the one that is, I believe it's in Ve'es Chanon. Okay. So what do you see here? That mitzvahs is more like kelim, and Torah is more like oir. Mitzvah is galgalta, the skull, a keli, and Torah is the chachmas tima that's within it. V'zeu atam, he says down the parentheses, and this is the reason. Masha viter hakadosh baruch hu al avei de zara, v'loy viter al ma'asa shel Torah. So it talks about by the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So it says the reasons why the first temple was destroyed, the second temple. So it's a very powerful statement. It says that God was able to mevater, he was able to overlook the sin of Avodah Zarah, idolatry, which is one of the Gimel Averis Yareg V'lo Yaver. It's one of the cardinal sins. But he was able to be viter al zeh. He was able to forgive or overlook. But he was not able to be mevater on the desecration and the defilement of Torah. Because Torah, essentially, when you taxify the internal organs, that is already leads to real death. For example, if a person, let's say, gets an infection, God forbid, or in some way injures or wounds an outer organ, an arm, a leg, it's not the same as getting a wound or injury to your heart or to your very brain. So he's saying this is the reason. As is discussed at length in the Maimer Vishenantam, I believe is also in Likutei Torah. Maybe not, because he doesn't say Likutei Torah here. I have to look it up, but I'm almost sure it's discussed there. So it's a very interesting thing. So Avodah Zarah is definitely one of the cardinal sins. It's even worse than defiling the Torah. You're supposed to die before you do that. But its effect, its so-called damage to the organism is not quite the same. You have to look in the Maimer there to understand it well. Yes, of course, you're denying God. Avodah Zarah is a direct insult, a direct betrayal of God himself. But Torah is the evarim pnimim of the inner organ, and that's why it has a certain stronger, the way God says, I cannot overlook that. I cannot compromise on that, or yeah. I'll look it up in Vishinantam. I want to see the full explanation there. But he says Barichus. So that means it's at length there. So there's more to be said, a lot more to be said. And this is meaning that the mitzvahs are the level of containers. The sharsha mebchinas makif. And their root is from makif, which is not like oir. Vehem bchinas chitzenius. Shemakifim malbishim es ha'er. So they're a level of chitzenius. They're the outer dimension, a keli, that are makif. They encompass and surround and enclose the oir that's within them. So the oir is the primi, like the neshama within them, and the kelim are like the guf, in which they are encased inside these kelim called the mitzvahs. V'atera b'chinas primius, v'hainu b'chinas ha'oir. And Torah is that which is within, the neshama within the keli, the oir. The inner, which is the level of oir. So mitzvahs is keli, and Torah is oir. The kamoi kain, going back to what he said initially, b'chinas galgalta, who kamoi b'chinas kli, keli. The skull is like the level of a container; it contains. Who etzem hal galgelis kamesha kasu b'makam acher. And we're talking about the very essence of this galgelis. There's also chitzenius of galgalta. There's primius. There's the etzem of galgelis. The very etzem, or etzem also can mean the bone, but it means here etzem of galgelis, the very core of this skull. That's the keli, the mitzvahs. Shebeteiche hamoyach, in which there is the moyach, which encases like a container, the mind inside, the brain. Ukamoy came b'shem Havaya, and so too is it the name of Havaya. Sheba atzmus, Havaya as an atzmus, as we said, Havaya before the tzimtzum. The bederach klal, Hushem Havaya, the next page, 1286. That in general, this is the Shem Havaya Sheberotzen. In general, is the Shem Havaya in God's Rotzen, which he's focusing a lot here about Rotzen, the Rotzen of mitzvahs, Rotzen Atzmi, which is Golgalta. Hine ha-mitzvahs em chinas esis v'kelim. The mitzvahs are the esis, the letters and the containers of this Havaya in the Rotzen. In other words, how this desire manifests. V'atei b'chinas ha'er v'aprimius in the Rotzen. The er is the er and primius within, which is like chochmas tema. It has an intelligence. It's not just driven, but this is God's will. This is also the inner energy within it, like the oir and the keli. So right now we've established that mitzvahs and Torah are kelim and oir, bal kain, and therefore hamshachish adei mitzvahs sudak b'chinas chitzenius ha'oir. And that's why, because mitzvahs is this level of the Golgalta and the level of kelim. So on the surface, it's a level of chitzenius ha'oir. Is relatively speaking, it's the outer dimension. But now he's going to qualify. Didn't we say that mitzvahs is rotzen atzmi? Umasha mitzvahs and primius legabe elamis. When we say mitzvahs are primius compared to the worlds we said earlier is chitzenius. The building, the structure, that's chitzenius. Now you're saying mitzvahs are chitzenius. So he says the fact that the mitzvahs are primius legabe elamis hanushem bechinas yudke kanal is because the mitzvahs carry the yudke. And Yudke is primius compared to the chitzenius. The rotzen, the elemis, and b'chinas vavke. The desire for the world, which means the worlds where the mitzvahs will be manifest and performed, that's the level of vavke. B'chinas is pashtus ha'er. Rotzen, the mitzvahs, and b'chinas Yudke, b'chinas etzem ha'er. So it's still chitzenius compared to higher, but compared to the vavke, it's a primius. So the Yudke is etzmer, aval bezer gufa hamitzvus hem b'chinas chitzenius. But in this level itself, in this etzmer itself, is a level of chitzenius compared to Torah, which is primius, and definitely compared to higher levels, which we'll get to. V'hainu, and this means the fisha mitzvus hem b'chinas kelim, because the mitzvahs are this level of containers. Hine zehu masha kelim mamshech er shezer b'chinas chitzenius er. So remember, we learned about Kalim when he asked the question, why do mitzvahs draw down more energy than a Keli does? So he said, it's true, mitzvahs on their own, what do? They draw down like a keli, draws like an aver. When the organ is healthy, let's say the eye is a healthy physical eye, it will draw the power of vision into it. So mitzvahs, because they're keli, and this is the keli on its own, that's mamshich eir, shezeh b'chinas chitzenius eir. Again, chitzenius here is relative, just to the higher levels, but it's pnimius compared to the lower levels. Mashek in Torah, whereas Torah, who b'chinas ha'er is not keli eir, hainu loy masha keli mamshich ki mamshachas ha'er ba'atzmei. So it's not what the keli is drawing, it's the hamshach of the eir itself, what the eir is extending itself. But we're going to learn this is still all eir is bekelim. It's just two different dimensions in that. So you have the container drawing the energy, which is more of an external energy, and then you have the eir itself extending, that's Torah, eir asmei. V'zehu. I'm going to explain this all more, but I want to read it inside the whole piece before I explain. V'zehu shekol inyan ha-mitzvos, and this is the meaning that the whole inyan of mitzvahs, hu tikkun ha-kelim. Mitzvahs come to repair the containers. So the pasuk says, "Vasisam oisam," you shall perform the mitzvahs, but the expression is vasisam. What means asisam? You can say v'kaimu oisam. There's different expression. What means vasisam? You create them. Asisam, it's not just sounds like, it doesn't sound like just fulfilling. It sounds like creating them. So he says, the Maimon Chazal say, "Maila ani alechem." The fact that it says vasisam, as if you're creating them, he's saying, I will consider it, the Abishter says, Ki'ilu asuni, as if you have created me, as if you've built me. That's what it says. When you do a mitzvah, the Chazal say, since it says vasisam oisam, that the mitzvah doesn't just fulfill God's will, in a way you're actually building the Adam HaElyon. Now, obviously, God forbid, we don't create God, but we create the infrastructure that when a person does mitzvahs, you're building the Adam HaElyon of Atzilus and higher into a full-bodied entity that is living up to what God wants it to be. So the mitzvahs actually are like a tikkun of kelim that actually so-called build the structure of the Adam HaElyon, of the supernal man in the higher worlds. So what do you see from that? That a mitzvah is more than just doing what God wants. You're actually building a structure. Every mitzvah corresponds to another part of the human body. Same thing with the spiritual divine body. So every mitzvah does another. When you put on tefillin, you're mamshich moichin, shibud alava moichin, you're mamshich moichin into midas. Every mitzvah builds the infrastructure of the divine cosmic order. By yedei tikkun hakeli nimshach ha'er. And by preparing and by refining, by repairing or refining and improving the keli, the nimshach ha'er. So let me explain this just in simple terms. When it comes to, let's say, human body, so a healthy body, thank God, God created it in a way, doesn't need any effort. You just don't make sure you don't destroy it. So there's eris and kelim. Every part of the body has its keli, whether it's the eyes, the ears, the heart, the brain. Every part of the body has a keli. And then there's the eir neshama that enters there. What is expected of us? To be healthy. To eat properly, to exercise, to intake the proper of nutrients, vitamins, to breathe healthy air, eat, drink, etc., to rest. What do? You avoid, of course, the next, not eating the wrong things, definitely not something that's toxic. So you're maintaining, and in many ways, you're actually building and nourishing your body. You're making it a healthier body, which is a mitzvah. Like the Rambam says, that hoyel, what does he say in Hilchos Deis? That the aguf body v'shalom medarkei Hashemu. A healthy body and complete body is from the paths of God, because God gave us a body to take care of. So in a sense, you don't create your body, obviously, because that's what we're born with, but you constantly, in a way, rebuilding it and making sure, nourishing it, nurturing it, etc. Same thing with Ruchnius. Since the mitzvahs are Ramach mitzvahs esse, Shasa mitzvahs leisese, There are 248 positive mitzvahs, correspond to what? To the 248 limbs, both ours and Evarim de Malka, and the 365 sinews, or whatever you call them, correspond, the 365 negative mitzvahs correspond to the Shasa Gidim, what you shouldn't do. So essentially, through mitzvahs, you're building a healthy, your body, also a spiritual body. Because every mitzvah corresponds to another part of it. When you use your eyes and you look at the right things, or the mitzvah, let's say, of Aliyah L'Regel, V'Ri'isa, you should come and see. You use your eyes to see Kedusha, holiness. Or the same thing, you're listening, you're hearing good things. You're learning Torah. You're using your body, all your organs. Yad Mechaleket Tzedakah. You use your hand to give charity. You're actually building and improving and repairing and elevating that the body should be aligned to what God wants this body to be like. But also, L'mayla v'asisam oisam, you're also building the spiritual body of the Ramach, of the Ramach Evarim Eshasagidim, of the Evarim de Malka. So that's what mitzvahs do. So by making sure the keli is aligned with what God wants that keli, using your hand to give tzedakah, so now the keli draws the oir chesed, or whatever the hamshach is, that tzedakah is mamshich, into the kelim. Oiris and kelim in the higher worlds, and oiris and kelim in our own very beings. The V'chein b'shoshan, so this is Tikkun HaKel Nimshcher, V'chein b'shoshan, and so too in the root, Heim b'chinas oiris v'kelim, is the level of oiris and kelim, mitzvahs, v'kelim mamshichim esa'ir. That's what mitzvahs do. It aligns existence and aligns all the levels of the kelim to the oir, and is drawing oir into it. That's what a mitzvah fundamentally does. Mashenk and Torah, what does Torah do in this context? Hu hamshocha se'er. Torah itself is drawing energy. That would be like loy masha keli mamshich. This is not do that you've made you made yourself into a keli and you made sure that all parts of the kelim are healthy to draw energy. This is the hamshach of oir itself. Mamshich zebchinas etzem ha'oir. And again, etzem ha'oir here means etzem compared to the mitzvahs, the etzem ha'oir. So in addition, mitzvahs draw the energy into the kelim, but you want to have a deeper level of oir, you need to learn Torah and connect with God's chachmasei is baruch. And as you learn Torah and internalize Torah, you're drawing down more energy, but it's still not an oir chadash. It's just more than mitzvahs on their own. That's why mitzvahs alone draw down energy commensurate to the containers, and Torah draws down on a deeper level of oir, like he said, the oir of Havaya, not just the kelim that draw down the oir. Ukamoshi is boir, Ezes Hashem is baruch, as shall be explained with God's help. But mailas haTorah ala tefillah, the quality of Torah over prayer. Shateri loy masha keli mamshich. That Torah is not what the container draws. V'loy masha keli tefes, and not what the container contains and grasps. Remember, I mentioned on Sunday that Torah tefillah is mamata l'mayla. That's how we build it from the bottom up. That's like building kelim to draw energy. Torah is mamayla l'mata. God gave us Torah as a gift from above, so it draws down energy from higher levels. But we're talking all in the realm of giluyim. Just there's the difference between the keli, the mitzvahs, and the Torah. And that's where the mitzvahs are essentially elevating things from the bottom up. You take this physical world and you do a mitzvah with it. Like in Torah, the Chanukah Maimer there, Mezuzi Yamin, and the explanation of that discourse. V'sham Gamkein, and there he also says, Shem B'chinas Esis V'rotzna Elyon, that the mitzvahs are the level of letters and the supernal will, which is consistent with what we say here, Esis Kelim Rotzna Elyon. Shaydei mitzvahs daka lamato. When a person, for example, performs charity, gives tzedakah. Below, ma'erid in the Maila, it awakens, stimulates, arouses above. Hamshacha lahachis ruach shvalim. The hamshacha, mida keneged mida, commensurate. When you give tzedakah to someone who's in need, you in turn are drawing down an energy into the keli, lahachis ruach shvalim, that the Eibishter should sustain, should energize, should vitalize the spirit of the low-hearted, of those that are shvalim, not low-hearted. When you say the downtrodden. So God, you're drawing down an energy that vitalizes and energizes the spirit of the downtrodden, shvelim, people who are feeling low. Ukahai gavne b'chol mitzvos, and similar with all the mitzvahs. Aval Torah hu b'chinas hamshacha mamayla lamata. Torah is, on the other hand, Torah is not initiated by us. Yes, we do the mitzvah of learning Torah, but Torah is a gift from Matan Torah. Matan is a matana. God gave us the Torah. He gave us His wisdom. And through learning Torah, you're drawing down God's desire and chachma in how we should govern our lives. And the reason for, and this is because lifisha mitzvahs hey b'chinas kelim b'chinas chitzenius, because the mitzvahs are the level of containers, and the outer dimension Havaya the air relates to the kelim, to existence. The sham shaykh halas man, and that's where that we have the relationship with halas man, the aveda below. Man is also mamata lamayla. Shezeu hanimshach hayidei halas man, because this energy, the chitzenius air that's drawn into the kelim, is nimshach through the halas man, which is the elevation of the mayim nukvim, the feminine waters, which means this effort that's initiated from below. B'tikun hakeli, in the repair or the beautification even, and of the container, shemamshicha sha'ir al yidei zeh, through which you draw the energy through this, the keli being, as the keli gets more refined and more conducive, it draws more energy into it. But Torah, on the other hand, he b'chinas pnimis ha'er. Torah is the pnimius ha'er of the gilui. The pnimius ha'er of the gilui, shalamayla ma'kelim, that's higher than the containers of Havaya. Harihu b'chinas hamshacha milmayla lamata. That's hamshacha milmayla lamata. So now he's added, which he hasn't discussed before, the difference between Torah and mitzvahs in the context of Shmoy and Havaya. The Oyer of Havaya, the Kelim of Havaya, but they're all Havaya. They're all Gilui. The question is it a Gilui of the energy as it relates to existence through mitzvahs that make Kelim that draw down Oyer? Or is it energy, or is it coming from the Oyer, from a deeper level of the Oyer, which is like the Yud-Kei, that the Pnimius, which is Torah? Actually, it's more than just Yud-Kei, because mitzvahs is the letters of Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei. It's the Oyer of the Havaya. Okay, so mitzvahs also you have Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei. The mitzvah says, like he said in the parentheses on top. So the mitzvah is the letters of Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei. In that, there's two levels. And then there's the Oyer of Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei, which is Torah, Mamayla, Lamata. So now in Giluyim, you have both levels. Now the Gilui La'atzmai, he didn't say that Torah is Gilui La'atzmai and mitzvahs is Gilui L'zulas explicitly, because you have to say that mitzvahs probably has both. But it could be that Torah is a little more like Gilui La'atzmai. Not sure about that. He didn't make that distinction. Yeah, he said mitzvahs is also Gilui La'atzmai, but instead itself, yeah, just the two levels within that levels itself. Okay. So I'm going to stop here. Any questions?
What's the keli he's referring to? But tikkun hakeli shemamshicha. What's?
I just explained that length. If you're talking about in the human body, it's each part of the human body corresponds to a mitzvah, whether it's the arm to give tzedakah. If you're talking about the supernal body, you're talking about Evarim de Malko, that every mitzvah corresponds to another dimension of the spheres, the kelim of the spheres of Zah, like we learned earlier. that the mitzvahs relate to the kelim of Zah, and they are mamshich the oir into each part of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, so on.
Got it. Thank you.
If you want more about the kelim of mitzvahs, where was that? That was before when he spoke about, the bottom of, if you look at the bottom of page 1266 and the top of 1267, he gives a little more description of how the mitzvahs are kelim. Okay.
Yeah,
Any other questions?
Yeah, Chachma Sima in relative to the actual body, it was again the class talking about the relationship with the Galta, and that was Ratzon, right, Ketzer. Chachma Sima, is that the chrome? What we used to learn about the chrome or the chrome, the membrane between the Galta and the Moach? We learned something about that, I think, in volume 2. How does that Chachma Sima relate to the actual physical body? He brought an analogy earlier.
Sometimes it's compared to that space, yeah. Above the skull, between the skull and the, yeah. There's a space between the skull and the brain.
Wasn't that called chrome or krum? Something like that?
But there's also avira al gaba krema. Krema is like a membrane, but there's also a space above the membrane. So chachma stima are those two levels. We learned it in volume 2 and also in volume 1, I believe.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, good. When the Rebbe says here in the end, Shalvei mitzvah tzedakah lamata morim lamaylo hamshacha lachayos ruach shvalim, it brings down, gives light, enlivens the spirit of the downtrodden. That downtrodden is the one you're giving the tzedakah to. It's not referring here to the person that's giving the tzedakah, which is the mitzvah. I thought the Rebbe was going to talk there about by giving tzedakah how it affects the person that's doing the mitzvah of giving the tzedakah rather than the person that's receiving it.
Well, bottom line is when you help somebody, God helps not just you, but everybody. You know, Zakah generates Zakah. So we all have probably an element of Ruach Shvalim maybe within each of us that God elevates our so-called downtrodden levels. But it could also be that in general, you're generating that type of energy. You have to look at different places. It talks about this. There's also how it affects you, but also affects in general. You're generating L'cha Hashem Tzedakah, God's blessings and gifts to all of us, to the entire human race. You could also say that you help someone, and then God helps them as well because you've done it. It's like a cause and effect. But I don't think it precludes also the help to eat the Ruach Shvalim. Like it says sometimes that when you give Zdakah, you save a life, God will save your child's life, type of thing.
So it could be learned as the Ruach Shvalim within the person that's actually doing the mitzvah?
I don't know. He doesn't say enough here. I have to look up. I'm just speculating that probably it includes all of it. Here he just says L'hachis Ruach Sham, that it's just drawing down that energy. My assumption is that it includes in you and in everyone.
Also, right above that in the parentheses, it says, "Ma'alas Torah tefillah shatorah he lo masha keli mamshich, but lo masha keli tofet." Meaning Torah. What's that mean? That the keli isn't able to grasp it? I thought when we bring down Torah, we're grasping there. There's something here that we're not.
It means it's more than just what the keli can grasp. You're bringing into the keli something that the keli itself would not have drawn and would not have been able to grasp. But ultimately, it is going to be grasped. Like he says in chapter 5 in Tanya, less machshavet tfisabeit. You can't grasp it on your own, but the Torah allows you to grasp it.
Oh,
he says he's going to discuss it later. It's interesting that he says be'ezer Hashem yisbarach. He doesn't usually say that because it could be the Rebbe Rashab knew that he wouldn't be able to finish because the Hemshel doesn't conclude. So it could be he's already giving a blessing that he should be with God's help, that he should conclude it. I just happened to notice that right now here. Okay.
So you mean this, saying that in a way it expands the keli to be able to grasp what it normally couldn't grasp? Now it's going to be able to...
We'll learn later. Since he said K'moshe is barred, I'm sure we'll learn about it, but that's my guess. That's what he means.
Also, this whole paragraph.
But
what
the
we learned
keli
today-
is not grasped on its own. It's something being brought into the keli. The keli wouldn't grasp it on its own. That's what I think it means. Or it could also mean that something remains higher than the keli, as the Torah is mamshich that remains somewhat removed or above the keli. That's also possible. I'm just guessing. I can't tell you for sure.
This whole discussion today about etzem or that etzem or I always is not level of who. I would think, I don't know, is it? Because
I've explained in almost every class that he uses etzem or two different ways in this Maimarim here.
Yeah.
The first place etzem or is it etzem of the existence of something. That's who. Then in the level of gilui, he uses etzem or. I would say it's etzem gilui. So etzem or has been used a few different ways here, two different ways. Generally speaking, now when he says etzem or, he's talking in context of etzem or and spashtus or, both in the world of gilui. But he did use the word etzem or on who earlier. It's different levels. It's just not. It's not a contradiction. It's just different words of how you just explain it. It's all relative. Because he did use the words. He said clearly. The level he says. This calls it helam ha'er. So helam ha'er, even the one that's completely beyond gili, still calls it er, because it's still some amshach. It's amshach from the Eibishter, just not a gili of the Eibishter.
Right, because I've always learned that or, whenever you talk about or as opposed to ma'or, is represents some type of hamshacha, and that's what you are saying that it is.
But then there's also element of er as gili. Like he's speaking. So you could have Amshacha that's not Gilui, Helam, Be'etzem, and you could have Amshacha that is Gilui. It's like two different Amshachas. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
By the way, that discussion in the beginning of the class was about the unspeakable that words can't express. And that level was really remarkable, Rabbi. I'm sure I'm sharing everybody's feeling that the whole introduction you gave today was mind-blowing, really. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, trying to understand it all. Okay, so we're going to end here by this paragraph. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Eliezer. Stop here, but if you read the next line, just to keep you intrigued, so now he's going to go to what who is and what neshamas accomplish. All this is Torah and Mitzvos. So the next section is going to take it to another level altogether, the level of who, and it's going to be quite fascinating. I'm just pointing out that's where we're going, and this is going to be. As I said, today's class. Tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I won't be able to give a class, but you can definitely learn this, and it's connected to Bas Lagani as we spoke yesterday, and a little today.